In this video, I'm going to share exactly how much you need to have saved at each age in order to break that paycheck to paycheck cycle and build wealth. And as an added bonus, I'm going to share tips so that you can exceed those amounts. If you're new here, my name is Maoli Vodi with Financially Present, and I want you to take a moment, hit that like button, subscribe if you're new to the channel, and turn on notifications so that you don't miss out on future content. And starting with our 20s, there are first and foremost multiple sources for the numbers, so I'm going to link them in the comments obviously, but according to Empower, the median net worth is $7,522 if you're in your 20s. The average income, I don't really like averages that much, but the average income for ages 20 to 24 would be $40,456. Median income, which is a little bit more accurate, $39,104. Average savings, $20,540. Median savings, $5,400. Now, depending on where you are, you may either feel like you need to give yourself a pat on the back, or you feel like you have to get to work. And that's normal. I just want you to understand that with these numbers, they are all over the place. There are people who are at the very minimum, and then there are others who are off the charts, so in the top 1 percentile of this age range. And I just want you to take a moment and realize that there's a spectrum in life, and it's hard to figure out where you fall in, and not all of it is as realistic as it is. Depending on your everyday, there are factors like your education, your background, where your locale is, and so many other things that will factor into the amount of income you have and the resources you have. So I want you to bring that into consideration. And before I share some tips, I want you to just understand that these numbers may or may not surprise you, simply because if you're going to college, obviously that's someone who would be in their 20s, especially early 20s, and you're going to be completely surrounded by college debt. You're going to be surrounded by difficulties in getting job opportunities. And in fact, of course, you'll be at entry level, so the income level is going to be significantly lower. But I do have some really helpful tips that you can utilize and make sure that you can exceed these numbers. First things first, your savings. You need to increase that, obviously. And the earlier you start increasing your savings, the easier it is. And in fact, 15% would be the ideal amount, the ideal percentage of your income. And you may not start with that, but work your way up to that as quickly as possible. When it comes to building wealth and increasing your savings, starting early and often allows compounding to help in your favor. And if you want to know how I did on something like this, I have a separate video that I'll link right here so that you'll be able to check that out. As far as the amount of savings that you need to have, don't worry about the amounts that I stated before. As far as your savings amount, the amount needs to be 3 to 6 months of your living costs. And the only true way to really determine that is to budget. So start budgeting early. You'll find a theme, and early works best when it comes in with investing and wealth building. But 3 to 6 months is a perfect amount for you to switch jobs with, or to take a break, or if you get laid off, you have enough to sustain you. And because you're in your 20s, odds are your living costs aren't as expensive at this current stage. So it's really important that you have that amount saved up. Some other tips that I would share is that you need to build your credit. So that means getting a credit card. And I know credit can seem a little bit scary at times, but if you don't have credit at all, then loan institutions, banks, they don't know how to trust you, and they need to see those behaviors and how long you've had those credit behaviors. So having a credit card would be the easiest way to start that. So start when you're young, because it will pay off when you're older, assuming you take care of that debt that you're managing. Some more tips that I would share is to choose that special someone carefully. And you know exactly what I mean. When you're in your 20s, you meet a lot of people, and you may very well meet the one that you want to merge lives with. And that's perfectly fine. But it's important to have the right habits that you want to continue before you merge your life with someone, because it's much harder to do it after you've met them. Another thing you want to make sure that you work on too is your professional life. So we're talking about certifications, licenses. These are the best ways to establish yourself in your field and increase your income, because now you become more useful in different arenas. Another tip would be to make sure that you're uncomfortable. And what I mean by that is to make sure you don't stay too long at particular jobs. Statistics show that if you move jobs every 2 or 3 years, you are more than likely to make more money than someone who stays at the same employer for years and years and years to come. So be mindful of where you are and your next move. My last 2 tips: if you're in your 20s, I want you to make sure you focus on your retirement. So that means 2 things. I want you to open a Roth IRA and make sure you start contributing early. The amount itself doesn't quite matter to me, but the habits of you regularly investing and contributing in a Roth IRA, that's what we need to focus on, because it makes it much easier when you have more income to just continue with the habits that you've already created. And then also contribute to your workplace retirement plan. And I know a lot of people will mention just do the minimum or 4%, but I will always tell you that it's better to contribute a little bit more than the minimum, because you'll be that much further than anyone else doing the minimum. So definitely do that, because it compounds and it builds on throughout time. Now this brings me to the 30s. If you're in your 30s, you can experience a median net worth of $35,309, median income of $57,356, average savings of $20,540, and then what savings should be for you would be half of your salary. But when you move up to being about 35, you should expect to have about 1 to 1.5 times that amount saved when it comes to your savings. So now when it comes to your 30s, consider everything I mentioned in your 20s, but it needs to be a little bit more serious now, because this is where you should be a little bit more established in your field or have an idea of what you may want to do. So this may mean transitioning from a different lifestyle to another. It may be moving from city to city. It could be so many different things. It could also be now finally marrying someone, or whatever it may be. A lot of these things start to get solidified in your 30s. So I have some special tips for you. And that starts with avoiding lifestyle creep. You see, a lot of times people in their 30s, they are more than likely to own some property. And if you don't, that's perfectly fine. But when you own property, it can be expensive. And you can decide that, hey, now I own property and I want more things, and I want this and I want that. And these things are going to increase your lifestyle costs. And now, once you have more costs, it's now a requirement that you make more money to keep up with those costs. So by avoiding lifestyle creep, you can make sure that you manage your living costs and keep it just manageable. Retirement, this is another big focus. And I know if you're in your 30s, you may still feel like you're young. I'm in my 30s, I feel pretty young. But obviously retirement is very important, because these are the things that are going to help determine how well we'll live in our future years. So the 30s, you need to focus on maxing out your 401k, and then also making higher contributions in your Roth IRA or any other retirement accounts that you have. Next tip would be about kids. There's a chance that you may have kids. If you don't, that's perfectly fine, but kids can be expensive, and they're also just very fun to have. You can enjoy them as well, and they can take care of you when you get older, but there is no guarantee. So what I want you to do is make sure that you're focusing on your retirement. There's still this idea that it's better to give and support and do everything for them, but trust me, I've worked with several people. It's much easier for you to fund your retirement and fund your savings and have to give some of that to your kids than for you to sow all of it into your kids and then try to get it from them when they're older. Transportation. This is something I didn't mention in the 20s, but I think it's more important in the 30s, because you've lived a little bit longer, and you know that if you have a car that's paid off, you could potentially be saving $400 to $600 a month. And that would equate to about $4,800 to $7,200 a year. That amount of money, even if for a couple years you had that, that's the same money you could use to max out your 401k, or to pay off any unnecessary debt, max out your Roth IRA contributions, or just handle any other situation. Some people would even decide to use that money to make an extra mortgage payment to pay off their mortgage sooner. And that's perfectly fine if that's your focus. Me personally, not necessarily, but having that extra money by not having a car payment can really do well for you financially. And then the last tip I'll give you if you're in your 30s is to beef up your network. this is the point in your life where you're going to meet people, and you may very well be that person that's been in the same career for about 10 years, and you'll know a lot of those type of people. And you need to figure out, are you going to stay within your field, or do you need to know someone else that can pull you in, or how can you leverage your network to make sure that you are putting your best foot forward? Because as we're in our 30s, we are now starting to approach our 40s, and that's where we really step into our higher earning years. In fact, the most money that's made is going to be in the 40s and 50s. This leads me to the 40s. If you're in your 40s, you can experience a median net worth of $124,509, median income of $67,652, average savings of $41,540. Your median savings should be 1.5 to 2.5 times your salary. But if you're closer to 45, 2.5 to 4 times your salary. And before I share some tips for anyone in their 40s, I just want to make a comment that in this stage of your life, a few things that are going to happen. You're more than likely done with student loans if you went to college or had any additional schooling. And if you aren't, that's okay. Again, not everyone's situation is the same, but you also may have kids, and you could very well be married, you could very well have a mortgage. So there's a chance that you have some expensive debt and then some debt that isn't so expensive. This is where you really need to rein some things in. And that goes to some of my additional tips. First is retirement. Now, this should be consistent as far as the commitment to making contributions, investing on a regular basis, increasing contributions. Like, we need to have that solidified at this age. And it only gets bigger and better because, again, these are your highest earning years. So you want to make sure that you're taking the most advantage of it. And it leads into tax planning because, as you know, if you make contributions to a workplace retirement plan, especially if it's pre-tax, then it's going to reduce your taxable income for all of these more expensive years. Actually, they would be more expensive because you're making more. So you'll be taxed more. And if you can reduce that, it's much better for you. And it also is good to just understand just taxes in general, or have a CPA that you regularly use so that you're being updated about the tax laws and the tax code. And in addition to all of the other tips, I want you to make sure that you really focus on this in your 40s, and technically you could in your 30s, but I need you to prioritize your health. At this time, you might have aging parents, aging relatives, and it's gonna help you really think about what it means to be healthy and look at what you can do in your current state to help your future state. So prioritizing your health will allow you to improve or maintain the same quality of life that you currently have in your 40s. Now this leads me to the 50s. If you are in your 50s, you can very well see a median net worth of $287,482, a median income of $69,628, average savings of $142,069, and then the median savings of 3.5 times to 6 times your salary. Okay, and you obviously have your higher earning years to thank for this, because as you make more will grow. And if you have been doing this for a number of years, maybe since your 20s, remember you're starting early, right? You'll see that growth because your money is making more money for you. It's not just you doing all of the efforts and it's all of your power. No, you're allowing the compounding of the market, interest rates, all of these things can help you build your wealth. I have 2 main tips if you're in your 50s. The number 1 tip is to ensure you are budgeting, and that should go without saying for all of them, but budgeting is extremely important because you more than likely have some adult or teenage kids that need to be part of that budget. You have other things, other competing priorities, and you have to ensure that you're managing your retirement and your investments with the right mindset. So this means that you do have to create some boundaries, and budgeting allows you to do that. And then the second tip would be your career. Let's focus on your career a little bit and see, are you in a space where you can continue doing this? Are you in a space where you could be a thought leader and perhaps own a business in this space? Because what's going to happen is as you age, you're not going to be able to do the same things, make the same amounts, or want to even have the desire to do the same things. So now we're about to start seeing how our income can decline post being 50. So these are things you have to start thinking about in your 50s right now. And now that leads me to my 60s. If you were in your 60s, you could experience a median net worth of $439,050, a median income of $65,936, average savings of $207,874, and then a median savings of 6 times your salary all the way up to 11 times your salary. And again, the heavy lifting has been done by your younger years, and you also have the advantage of lower cost homes, less inflation that you're dealing with today, right? And your home, transportation costs, those things, because you're established and had been established in your field over all these working years, hopefully you're allowing yourself to reap some of the benefits of that. So, but it does mean that you need to have sufficient nest egg. Much is going to be expected of you, especially if you decide you do not want to work anymore, because now this is where your income is going to be limited. So some of the tips that I will share. Budgeting now in your 60s is as important as budgeting in your 20s, because your ability to earn is dwindling in your 60s, and then as you get older. You have to essentially already know what you want to do. You have to make sure that you've already met the max earning potential in those fields. And you also have multiple areas of your life where you are expected to be at a certain benchmark. So hopefully you may have a mortgage that's paid off, or you have your primary residence covered, because that's the number one cost for most people. It's your living costs or your housing costs essentially, and then your transportation costs and food and groceries. Those are the main costs. That takes up over 60% of your costs, and that's anyone. But if your housing cost is already taken care of, that is more than half the battle. And it's important that budgeting helps you create these boundaries. Another tip would be to focus on your investing. And what I mean is not to begin day trading or doing anything crazy, but you have to look at the level of aggressive growth that you used to have in your investment portfolio. And now you have to almost go against your better judgment, because now you're in a stage where you need to be concerned with preservation of capital. And that means you're gonna have to sell some of the risky investments or reduce the risk in your investment profile so that you can preserve what you've worked so hard for over the years and you've watched it appreciate over the years. If you make too many mistakes with investing in your 60s, you could lose a big chunk of your nest egg, and that's going to be hard to recover from. Basically, what I'm saying is you're going to have to look at the outperforming investments, and you're going to have to reel some things back, because at the end of the day, you need to align your investment portfolio according to your risk, not just based off of what the market is saying and doing and what all the news is, but it has to be based upon your lifestyle and your timeline. So your risk is what takes precedent in your 60s. And the last tip I want to mention for someone in their 60s, and this is critical, it may be the most important tip in the entire video. Focus on technology. You're at an age now where you have been outpaced by technology, and I'm also being outpaced by technology, but as a people, we have to continue to teach ourselves on a regular basis. And when I spoke to people in their 60s and 70s, their biggest frustration was technology. And we're talking about things as basic as having multiple passwords, or having to connect to the internet, or just getting used to all of the changing components of using a laptop and a computer, or having transactions being handled digitally versus in person in an office, and having difficulties getting someone on the phone. And all of these little things are part of a changing society. And if you aren't in tune with technology, you could be very well a target by fraudsters, and they're ideally going to target you because you just naturally have more money. It's not about your intelligence at all. It's an opportunistic thing. And if they see people with more money, they have a bigger target on them. So make sure you're staying up to date on technology as best as you can, because I know people who are simply just so frustrated with multi-factor authentication. And I admit it is frustrating at times, but it is for a reason and it's for your security. So don't negate the importance of technology. And now that I've gone over the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and even the 60s, there's one thing I do want to mention, and it's the simple fact that life happens. There are some things that you can't necessarily plan for. And starting early helps, but it doesn't mean you're immune to specific things. So that means you may be laid off at some point. You may have a sick family member. You may have a disabled family member. And these are variables in life that happen. And the numbers won't always make sense for these type of situations. So I don't want you to necessarily beat yourself up about whether you fall ahead or behind, but just know that none of this is perfect, and do the best you can by starting early and preparing as best as you can. And all of this is the point of being financially present. And I always say, if you're secure in your finances, you can be present in other areas of your life that matter more. Until next time, stay present.